14 years ago, in a Super 8 motel, Pastors Ken and Valencia started Covenant Spokane. We had a chance to go back to this Super 8 motel and see where Covenant Spokane started.
Well, here we are. This is the Super 8 motel, and this is the conference room at the hotel. And this is the room where we had our first church service. And we were here for about 3 months before we moved into our first building. But as you can see, it's a pretty small room. You can see over here we have 2 congregants waiting to be saved at the end of this sermon. But at our first service, we had 8 people total, including me. We had my mom and dad, my sister Barbie and her husband, and my grandma and her friend. We were new to Spokane. We'd only been here for 3 months previous, so we didn't know a lot of people. So we were just begging anybody to come. I remember going to Kinko's in the valley and begging people to come. But we had accumulated a few families, and here we were 4 or 5 weeks into it, and I was up here with my pulpit and my sermon. Came on Sunday morning, waited, I had the coffee and donuts ready, and nobody showed up. I remember it was just my mom and dad. I even think my sister Barbie and her husband were out of town, and it was just my mom and dad and my wife. And I was sitting there, I was hoping somebody would come in late, but I didn't even have any latecomers that day. You know, you'd think somebody would at least come late. Nobody came late. And so I had my sermon out here, and I remember my dad was in the congregation, and my dad said, "Do you want me to share something and then we'll just go?" And I said, "No, Dad. I spent all night last night preparing the sermon," because I worked a secular job, so a lot of my sermons were, all night long. And I said, "Dad, I've worked all night long on this sermon. I'm going to preach it. So you just," and I said it respectfully, "just sit there, Dad, and Mom, and Valencia, because you're going to hear the best sermon you've ever heard." And I remember I started crying. Tears began to stream down my face, and I blubbered a little while, and then I picked myself up and preached the sermon. And because I believed in what we were doing, I just knew that if I stuck it out, if I just didn't quit, that somebody would like my preaching, and somebody would like for me to be their pastor. So this is the second place that we had services in, and we were so excited about this facility right here. After being in the Super 8 motel, this was like heaven for us. We have a parking lot with about 10 spots and a backyard for the kids to play in. My wife and I actually lived in this facility. Micah was born when we were here, and so this was the first house that Micah had. And we were so thankful. We had our Christian school here. My wife and I lived up in the attic. There was a kitchen and a laundry room and another room in the back. And so this was a big blessing for us coming out of the Super 8 motel. And I think we grew to about 20, 30 people in this building. But it was a wonderful time. I would never want to go back. But back then it was super exciting for us to have our first church building. Of course, we were just renting it. But what a blessing it was. And we're thankful to the Lord for the journey and the process. This is a special place in our hearts and for Covenant Spokane.